there were actually more conditions than you see in the Morgan Freeman documentary. So there was a condition that wasn't featured in the show, which was basically a human research assistant sitting in the chair as they were engaging in the act. So in the documentary, of course, you've got the control condition where it's just an empty chair and you tell them about Princess Alice sitting there. Or you don't tell them that there's anything there at all. And you see that contrast, which is quite vivid, I think, in terms of their response. But in the original study that we published, there was a third condition where one of the human experimenters was actually sitting in the room with them, just kind of present. And the effect was that they didn't cheat when the person was sitting there either. So the difference was negligible between the Princess Alice version versus the actual human experimenter sitting in the chair with them. But the one where they cheated, no matter what, was the control condition where they didn't hear anything about Princess Alice and there wasn't the actual human being sitting in the chair. So it's that sort of sense of a presence, whether it's a real presence or an imaginary presence, that seems to have this inhibitory effect on the cheating response. So it doesn't matter if it's real or fake, as long as it's real in the child's mind, or even they entertain the possibility that it's real, that you see this suppression of the antisocial cheating response.
Why don't immoral children who are atheists about this stuff evolve?
Well, I think, first of all, there's very little research actually on the developmental trajectory of atheism. We don't know a lot about why certain children become atheists and other children don't, even if they have very similar developmental experiences in terms of their parents' beliefs and so on. But we also, I think, have to be very cautious in just assuming that even if a child says that they're skeptical, that their behavior in a task like this would be fundamentally different than a child that buys into it whole hog. So it's that distinction between what people say they believe versus how they act, what they actually think. And I think we really capture that in experimental studies and laboratory studies where we measure behavioral responses. So much of the literature, I think, depends on survey responses and questionnaires and those types of things. But when you actually get adults or children into a lab, their behavior might be completely at odds with what they say they believe.
Do adults respond in a similar way?
They do, actually, with some caveats. We had another study, which wasn't featured on the show, where we told adult participants that basically they thought that they were participating in a study that was about spatial cognition. So it was just, they sat down at a computer, they were doing this really difficult task on a computer where you had to manipulate a three-dimensional object so that it lined up with something. I'm horrible at these types of spatial intelligence tasks, and these were really difficult tasks that we gave them to work on. And the experiment was kind of rigged in the sense that we built in a glitch into the procedure so that when they were trying to solve the problem, occasionally the correct answer would actually pop up on screen. And we told them in advance that if this happens, just press the space bar as quickly as you possibly can so that you can answer the question honestly. So we're still working out some kinks in this software. Just press the space bar if this happens. So basically, we could measure the amount of time they were looking at it to cheat, sort of intentionally cheat to find the correct answer to the problem they were working on. That was the paradigm, but we had a couple of different conditions. One condition was that they just simply did that, and we told them, whoever gets the top score is going to get a prize, going to get a $50 voucher for pizza or something like that. So it was a competitive task. Another group was told that they did the same thing, but they were told as they were getting, just being introduced into the room that, I swear this sounds really weird, but the graduate student who designed this software program, the spatial intelligence test, died in a horrible car accident right before we were getting ready to launch it. So, this study sort of is in their honor. And then the third group was told the same thing about that other graduate student, about the dead graduate student, but in passing was said, this is really weird, but some people have said that they've seen this person's ghost sitting in that chair in the corner of the room. Sort of leaving it at that, just sort of a casual remark. And basically, the take-home message is that the adult participants in this study took less time to study that image, that sort of cheating image, if they were told that the ghost was in the room, than those in the other two conditions. So what we didn't do with that study, however, was to assess beforehand whether they believed or didn't believe in the afterlife, which sort of in hindsight seems pretty stupid that we didn't actually do that. But we definitely found a pretty strong effect for just simply hearing about a ghost in the room and being less willing to cheat when given the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, hindsight's another matter. Did that ever get published? Or did?
Yeah, that was in JCC a long time ago.
Okay. And how did you get into experiments?
Experimenting on these types of topics, and well, I can actually tell you exactly what motivated my, or what was the inspiration for the Princess Alice studies, which is that when I was about the age of the children that I was testing in these studies, I don't know, 6, 7, something like that. I was growing up as the youngest child in a Jewish household, and as part of the Seder ritual for Passover, there's this bit basically where the youngest child in the family gets up after dinner and goes to the front door, opens the door, and allows into the house the spirit of Elijah. And the way that it works typically is that while you're standing at the door letting the ghost in, the parent, the father typically, will drink a glass of wine that's left on the dining room table. So then the kid comes back to the table and the wine is gone. And the parent says, "Oh, look, Elijah came in here and drank the wine and now he's left." And I just remember being absolutely petrified by this ritual, because I thought that when we let him into the house, this ghost of Elijah, he stayed there. He didn't leave after he drank the wine. So I thought our house was haunted by the spirit of Elijah. So every time something weird would happen in the house, I would think that it was Elijah, and it would petrify me. Like, I really genuinely felt the presence of an entity in the house, just simply because I was given this information, this fictional narrative about this spirit. So it sounds a bit sadistic now, but as an adult, I think I kind of wanted to get to the bottom of that sort of psychological sense of feeling like you're in the presence of a supernatural agent, and how this could potentially change your social behaviors, especially your moral decision making, when otherwise you think you're left alone. And it worked.
So you're famous for many things, but one of them is a view that people believe a whole lot more implicitly, even atheists, than they might state. And others have argued that actually atheism is much more prevalent than even believers will state. Will Gervais has a paper on that. What do you say to those others, or to people who simply say they don't believe?
I think it depends on how you operationalize atheism. I mean, as a sort of epistemological framework, of course, atheism exists as an explicit absence of a belief in supernatural agencies. But I think it's counterintuitive to the way that the human mind works. I think that atheism is cognitively effortful. It's very difficult to subscribe wholeheartedly to this epistemological stance when you're faced with particular anomalous incidents, for instance, in your everyday life, that the natural response or the more intuitive response is to attribute it to some sort of intentional agency or a mind that's doing it for a reason. So, I mean, I can give you lots of examples. I mean, one is I remember my mother. You know, my mother was I don't think I would say she was an agnostic, but she was definitely more on the skeptical side of things. And when I was a teenager and she was dying of ovarian cancer, really horrible time. I remember after one of her chemotherapy treatments, you know, she was vomiting in the toilet and just, you know, she probably weighed 95 pounds at that point, and she just was cowering sort of in the bathroom. And I remember, because I was watching this, her saying, you know, what did I do to deserve this? Like, why me? I'm a good person. And I mean, of course, she was a good person. But I remember just sort of looking at that, and then I asked her about that. Maybe a week later, when things had sort of settled down, she was feeling a little bit better. I said, "Do you remember, you know, your reaction?" And she said, "I never said that. You know, I would never. I don't believe that. I mean, things just happen. Bad things just happen. I don't think it has anything to do with being moral or immoral." So, and I've certainly had those types of feelings as well. When everything seems to be crashing down on you, it feels like, what the hell did I do to deserve this? I wouldn't articulate it if I were sort of a committed atheist and just refused the possibility that I had any sort of illogical inclinations. But that doesn't mean that those psychological feelings, you know, that instinct wasn't there. So that's what I sort of tried to differentiate. I try to differentiate between that explicit epistemology, this philosophical framework of atheism, and the psychological intuitions that I think are fundamental to human cognition that are difficult to override. But nevertheless, as atheists, we obviously can do that. But it takes time to get there, and it's not easy.
Yes, the narrow path, then difficult path, yeah. Okay, any advice to people who are interested in the study of religion? What would you tell them to do? Humanities people, and it makes some psychologists.
I mean, it's a really broad question, of course, but I guess I would be very careful with making sure that everybody is on the same page in terms of their audience and who they're trying to have a conversation with when they use words like religion, because they're such loaded terms. From a psychological point of view, religion to me was not terribly interesting because that was more like the sociological sort of elements of group-related belief structures. I was much more interested in sort of the core skeletal components, you know, belief in the afterlife, belief in destiny or purpose, belief that things happen for a reason, belief that there's an intelligent agency sort of behind the scenes. And I think that, well, those are universal psychological elements that pan out no matter what the content of your religious beliefs actually are. So I guess, really sort of identify what you mean when you use the terms that you use, and be clear about that.
What are you up to now?
I'm kind of going back to religion, actually. I mean, I'm working on this Templeton project on unbelief with Jamin here at Otago. We've got a series of experiments that we're trying to tease apart some of these questions. One of the things that we're doing, for instance, is a study where it's similar to the Princess Alice design, but it's with adults again. But we're looking at physiological responses to anomalous experiences when you're told that there's the presence of a supernatural agent in the room with you. So you might say, Joseph, that you absolutely do not believe in the continuity of mental states after death, that when you die, and that's absolutely it. I don't know what you believe, whatever. It's kind of irrelevant. But let's say that you were the type of person that, like me, I'm an extinctivist. I think that when you die, and that's it. However, despite me saying that, if I were in a room and I were told that there were a ghost in the room, I would tell you I don't believe that. It's just part of the experiment or something along those lines. But if I'm left alone in this room, small space, and all of a sudden the lights go off and it's just like black as night, my prediction would be that you'll actually capture something physiologically in terms of the response that betrays your explicit disbelief in the afterlife. So compared to people who don't hear anything about the ghost in the room, your heart rate will actually be much more pronounced. Your galvanic skin response will be much more pronounced if you are told there's a ghost in the room than if the same thing happens, the lights go off without hearing anything about the ghost in the room. So what does that tell you? I mean, to me, it tells you that you say you don't believe it, but your body is responding in a manner that suggests otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have an intellectual exercise for your students then to contemplate. I would ask your students to contemplate the following question. How would they operationalize or distinguish between the soul and the mind? You know, if push came to shove, what is the difference between those two constructs? I want to see them writhe and struggle. And they can't use words like energy and essence, meaning these sort of meaningless placeholder words that need definitions in their own right. Yeah, I mean, my answer to that question is that I don't think. Well, first of all, I don't believe in the existence of a soul. It sort of is any sort of immaterial entity, but I don't think that there is a difference in the way that people tend to use them. That'll be interesting. All right, well, good luck with it.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I know you have a lot of calls on your time, and really grateful that you've spent some of it here with me.
That's good. Good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise.